and whose name was Job. That man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. That really sets the tone for what we're looking at here. Job is being an upright man, one that's perfect and upright, and fears God and eschews evil. Now, there are other parts of the Bible that mention people in this fashion. One is Noah. In Genesis 6:9, it says this is an account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and walked faithfully with God. When I look at the book of Job and I look into Genesis and I see how Noah is described and I see how Job is described, Job fears God, walks upright, and eschews evil. But it says that Noah walks with God. And that's one of the first things that jumps out to me, that there are differences in the way that maybe I thought about, maybe we thought about, maybe that the perception is of the book, that a seemingly small difference can be something that's a lot larger. Going on, there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance was also 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household. So this man was the greatest of all men in the East. So we know that Job was a very well-to-do man. He had everything that a man at that time could ever want, need, or desire. Verse 4, we see that, and his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt sacrifices, according to the number of them. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus did Job continually. This brings me to another portion of the book that I've looked into now, and I've got a different and newer understanding of, that Job did these things as works. He did these things as works for his children, because if they died, he wanted to make sure that they were covered. So he put in works and did offerings. And we know in the New Testament that works and offerings and sacrifices are not what we're called to do for our salvation. We read in Matthew 7:21-23, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on this day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name did we not drive out demons? And in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" When we look in the book of Job, we see that his heart is in the right place. He knows that he does walk right, that he does things that are asked of him, and that he doesn't do wrong. And we'll get into that further down in the book. But that's one of the things that I want to point out with Job's sense of God and how things are supposed to work and the way that he envisioned them to work. If we look in the book of Ephesians, chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not for yourselves, as the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." Moving on to verse 6. "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, 'Whence comest thou?' Then Satan answered the Lord and said, 'From going to and fro in the earth, and walking up and down in it.'" So what was Satan doing during this time? Looking for something to devour. That's what he does. And God then goes, well, let me just go forward. God says to Satan, "Is thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and eschew evil?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for naught? hast thou not made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou wilt bless the works of his hands, and his substance will increase in the land. We know Satan to be the accuser. We know that God is righteous. And we know that Job walks upright. But here we have an opportunity. And previously, I may have thought that it was strange. And I've read a number of stories and ideas and listened to some others. And some will take the account of Job to say that a righteous man suffers. And the question then becomes, why does God allow a righteous man to suffer? We know that all things are working for good. We know that God works for good. And we know that he has a plan. And we know that he's not going to be outwitted by Satan. He's not going to be fooled by Satan. So he's not just going to offer Job as someone who he assumes or knows will fail. It's going to come to a point where God's plan works out. And so we understand that. In verse 11 we see, "But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he has is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thy hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job, and said, The oxen were plowing, and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them, and took them away. Yea, they have slain the serpents with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, The fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the serpents, and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came another, also another, and said, The Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and carried them away, yea, and slain the serpents with the edge of the sword, and I am only escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking there, when he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their elder brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote 4 corners of the house, and fell upon the young man, and they are dead, and I am only escaped to tell thee. And Job arose and went in his mount, and shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshipped, and said, Naked came I from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. This brings us to a point where we understand and we start to see where Job's mindset is and how he goes about things. When Job lost all that he had, I can't fathom, God forbid, that I would ever, or any of us would ever lose what Job did. By the grace of God, we've not. And to read about this and to see how Job reacted, we can go a little bit deeper into that. I said before that Noah had a relationship with God. Noah walked with God. And when Job lost all that he had, he worshiped. And in all that he did, he sinned not, and he blessed the name of the Lord. We know that with a relationship with God, and with other biblical characters even, that they speak to God and not of God. They're not speaking of God as an item or a thing or just a deity, they would speak to God and ask, why has this happened to me? Or the Bible shows us in Mark 15 and 34, that Jesus cried out to God when he was on the cross. In 2 Kings chapter 20, Hezekiah calls out to God for deliverance. In the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah calls out to God. Calling out to God is what we're shown to do. Not merely talking about him. And here we see that Job doesn't talk to God. It's a formula, if you will, and that really brings us to the point where we see that there is a bit of a disconnect from the way that we are supposed to understand things and the way things are written. Does anyone have any opinions on that? We'll move on to chapter 2. In chapter 2, Satan is allowed to afflict Job's person. This moves beyond simply taking away what he has and moves on to the man himself. Some will leave it here with Job's suffering not being revealed. Say, why is Job suffering? There hasn't been any explanation of why is he suffering? Why is this happening to Job? We'll read on and we'll see if the word informs us. Chapter 2, verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence cometh thou? And Satan answered the Lord, and said, From going to and from the earth, and walking up and down in it. And the Lord said to Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and eschew evil? And still he beholdeth fast to his integrity, although thou movest against him, to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord, and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thy hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. Again, we have the accuser saying that Job's not who you think he is. Job is going to turn. And God understands that Job is who he is and that he is an upright man. And though Job has come to a point where he makes the offerings and he does the things that he feels will cause him to be blessed and not have to deal with the evil in life, Satan still says that Job will turn on God. And he doesn't. Until we So the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he's in thy hand, but save his life. So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore blows, from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down amongst the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. This is another verse that points towards the formula that was at work here, that good works plus a good God equal good outcome, bad works and a good God equal a bad outcome. So if you, this is not our point of view, but the way that it's written, if you do something bad or do something wrong, then God will punish you. And that is a recurring theme in this book, that the thought process was, if you do good things, then good things will come to you. If you do bad things, then bad things will come to you. And that would put major constraints on God to say that he can only react in this way if we act in this way. And the baseline of that is that that gives man far too much credit. God doesn't operate according to us, to our actions, to our words. Yes, there are times when we will suffer, and suffering is part of life, but it's not a formula for us to say, okay, if I do all of these good things, then nothing bad will happen to me. And if I slip up and I do this bad thing, then I better look out because here comes a lightning strike. Because that's not the way that our God operates. But he said unto her, this is verse 10, but he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This is another turning point. When we look back at chapter 1, we see that at the end in 22, it says, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Now when we move into chapter 2, we see that he did not sin with his lips. If all things were the same, this could have just been repeated in chapter 2. But there's a change in Job. And the change in Job is something that comes out later on in the book, but I think that it could stand to be spoken about now. Originally in chapter 1, bad things befall Job, and he sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Moving on to chapter 2, after he's afflicted and he's already lost everything, and now he's to the point where he's not saying what he feels, and he's not saying anything wrong. But that doesn't change the fact that inside he's changing, that his viewpoint is changing, that his understanding is changing, that he as a person, as a man, is changing. Because, again, at this point, he doesn't sin with his lips, and he speaks of God again. He says, God gives, God takes away. But he hasn't yet, in this point of the book, said anything to God. He hasn't asked God a question. He hasn't told God that his suffering is beyond what he thinks that he can handle. And we've all been there. We've all been in the throes of life. And we've all gone about it our own way. And at some point in life, we all realize that you have to stop. You have to stop where you are. You have to stop with your thoughts. You have to stop with your actions. Because the only thing that's going to make any difference is God. And you have to talk to him for these things to happen. I understand that he knows what you need, but he also wants you to come to him. And thus far in the book, Job has not gone to God. Job has spoken of God. Job has not said anything out of bounds, out of line, and that goes along with his way of thinking, that if he continues to bless God's name, if he continues to say the right things, that these things will go away. But that doesn't do anything for his relationship with God. That doesn't do anything for his walk with God. And that's why in the book it says that he is an upright man, but it doesn't say that he has a relationship or walks with God. Remembering that the book of Job is about repentance and about a wayward servant who comes back into the fold. And the way that God speaks of him to Satan, we know that Job is a good man, and that Job was in the right place, and that Job did the right things. But somewhere along the lines, Job started to feel and think that the things that he does should continue to allow him to prosper. In verse 11, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one of them from their own place. Eliphaz from the Temanite, and Bildad from the Shunite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they had an appointment together to come to mourn with them and to comfort them. And when they lifted up their eyes afar, they knew him not. They lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his mail and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word to him. But they saw that his grief was very great. We go from here, and we see that his friends came, and we understand that he is in the greatest time of need of friendship, companionship, and just contact that any of us could ever imagine being in. And so before we move on to chapter 3, when we are in these situations and the closest people that we know come to us and are there for us, these are the people that are like us. And understand that there's not a time frame here or a timeline, but we do know that it was in a time that's not now, a time when the world was a lot smaller, when things were a lot more separated. And so we commune with people that have the same types of mindsets and the same types of ideas that we do. And these are going to be the closest people to them. These aren't going to be just friends that pop in and say, oh, hey, how's it going? These are the closest of friends. They would have to be for them to come to a man who's in this type of situation. So the things that they talk about and the things that they feel, and even going to the way that his wife thought that he should behave in cursing God to just die and get everything over with. We have to understand that people are generally around like-minded individuals. And so to that end, I would say that Job is of this mindset because his wife and his friends who come have the same mindset. I would find it extremely difficult to believe that Job was in a different type of mindset and was different than the people closest to him, because why would they come and express the things that they feel to him in that situation? And so we'll move on to chapter 3 and talk about the conversations that are had. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. Job spake and said, let the day perish while I was born, and the night in which it was said there was a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God guard from above, neither let the light shine upon it. This is an obvious change in his attitude and his demeanor. And as human beings, we can understand that. When things happen like this, if even one of these things happened, we would take a hard hit. And we do, constantly. But to have all these things happen, we see that Job is in an extremely dark place. Verse 4, let that day be darkness, correction 5, let darkness and the shadow of death stand, let cloud dwell upon it, let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it, let it not be joined to the days of the year, let it not come to the number of months. Lo, let that night be solitary, let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it, they curse the day, who are ready to raise up their morning. As I don't want to go line by line, we get a very good understanding of where his mindset is. And I think it's important to let that sink in and to get that understanding that we started a mere 2 chapters ago with a man who had everything and a man who went out of his way to make offerings for his children that in no real 2 ways about it was participating in a version of a prosperity gospel. You do well, things go good for you. And now his attitude has changed and he's beginning to be different. When we get down to it, Job believes that his lack of wrongdoing should prevent such things. That's an assumption, that good works produce blessings and bad acts reap suffering. And that's the implication there is that God doesn't run the world according to justice or that God is unjust. We know these things not to be true. I want to jump ahead to chapter 4. When his friend Eliphaz begins to speak to him. If we essay to commune with thee, will thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Behold, thou hast instructed me, and thou hast stretched out, strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him who was fallen, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. But now it has come upon thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thee art troubled. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways? Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished, being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off. Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. We have another assumption. We have accuser. We have his first friend saying to him, when bad people do bad things happen to them. And we'll go forward in the book and we'll read that not only this first friend, but the other friends have an idea that Job has done something to deserve what's happening to him. And try as I might, reading through this and studying this and putting this all together, I can't imagine how someone who walks as upright, far more upright than anything that I've even been able to do. I have to think of it from that point of view. Like, if the Bible was written today, would I be written into the Bible as a person who was upright and flawless? Probably not. And so for this man who has walked in this path and walked in this manner to be accused of something, or for his friends to have an idea that he's done something so awful to deserve all that has happened to him, I don't even know how that bridge gets crossed. It's something that I'm going to have to study more in this book and throughout the Bible. How do we get to a point where someone can feel that any of us can do something so bad to deserve this, and that's just the way it is? And so that will be something that I'll be looking further into. Verse 9, by the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils they are consumed. The roaring of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, and the teeth of the young lion are broken. The old lion perished for lack of prey, and the stout lion's whelps are scattered abroad. Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and mine ear received a little thereof. And thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep fell upon man, fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Then the spirit passed before my face, and the hair on my flesh stood up. It stood still, and I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before my eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying, shall mortal man be more than God? Shall a man be more pure than his Maker? Behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels in charge of fallen. How much less than them that dwell in the houses of clay? His foundation is the dust, which will crush before them off. They are destroyed from morning to evening. They perish forever without any regard. Does not their excellency, which is in them, go away? They die, even without wisdom. I want to jump forward. In chapter 9, verse 22. This is This is one thing, therefore I say it. He destroyed the perfect and the wicked. If the scourge slay suddenly, he will laugh at the trial of the innocent. Moving forward. In 27:8. For what is the hope of the hypocrite, though he hath gained when God taketh away the soul? These things being said to Job. Questioning him. Trying to figure out what he did. Don't really have a base in where our faith is.
I got a question.
Yeah.
It seems to me, how can Job be blameless if like he's lacking a relationship with God? To me, it's a pretty basic relationship you need to have is prayer, and if he's not doing it, it sounds to me like, the generations of that era, I mean, maybe they weren't all doing it either, but they're still seriously lacking, it seems like to me. I'm also wondering maybe back in chapter 1, maybe I should have brought this up earlier, but back in chapter 1, it says he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I come from my mother's womb. I'm wondering, is maybe that's not a prayer either, or I'm just sort of, I'm a little confused about that.
When he says that naked he came from his mother's womb and naked he shall return to her.
Is that not a prayer to God, though? I don't know. I'm just a little...
The way that I view that, and you guys can definitely feel free to interject and to correct me if I see it incorrectly, that Job's worship is in vain. A lot of the things that he does are in vain. And it's to go into the formula of God being stuck, per se, in the fashion of if somebody says the right things or does the right things, then the good things need to happen to them. We see that it does say that he fell down in worship, but it doesn't say that he prayed. I would think that would be something that is explicitly called out, saying that Job called out to God, or Job talked to God, Job asked God. But then he says, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. He's not talking to God. He wouldn't say that to God. He's saying, no, it essentially amounts to lip service. To say, okay, I've lost everything. Let me do the things that I think I'm supposed to do to appease God. Let me fall down on my face. Let me worship. Let me say that he does what he does, and I'm just going to accept it. And that's not what we're called to do as followers. And I don't want to say that it doesn't count, because I'm not the one to judge that, but we read in the book that that's what Job did, but we don't read that Job had the relationship to talk to God. Now, previously, the book of Job starts at this point. It doesn't go into the past or the life that Job led leading up to it. And so it does leave it open to interpretation. And the interpretation that I've gained from the reading and studying is that at some point, Job, being the upright and righteous man, did follow God the way that he was supposed to. He did the things he was supposed to. He prayed the way he was supposed to. But along the way, with the amount that he prospered and the offerings that he gave and the family that he gained and the material possessions that he gained, he, at some point, not written about, turned inward to himself to say that You do the righteous things and you'll be rewarded. And so he continued on doing the righteous things, being rewarded, feeling like the things that he was doing were what made all those things possible. And we know and understand that that's not quite the way that it works. You can have good things in life, but you're also going to have the suffering. And this wasn't, it's obviously all God's plan, but this was brought on by the accuser coming before God to say that Job will turn his back on you if you take away all that he has. And he didn't turn his back, but he also didn't go to God and say, all of these things that I have, all of this life that I have has been taken away. Why have you done this? And further on in the book, we'll get into what Job's conversations with God looked like. But to lose everything you have and fall on the ground and then say, well, God gives and God takes away, just points to him not going directly to God. If that, for any of us, if any of these things, one of these things happen, I would hope and pray that the first thing we would do is to seek God immediately. This has happened. What am I going to do? And it's the way that we operate. If a folly befalls us, if we have a great loss of one person, we talk to God. We don't just say that he gives and he takes away, and then that's it, and we're just going to be sad about it. Like, that's not what we're called to do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but he wasn't like totally blameless in that regard. He had his faults.
Oh,
Sure.
I'm sure. He couldn't have been, I can't say that he's not.
Every time I read this, I keep hearing about how great a man Job is, but he was seriously lacking.
Absolutely.
In that regard.
In his relationship with God. And
So in a way, maybe he brought it on himself too in that regard.
I agree.
I totally disagree with this line, this whole thought.
Really?
The devil came to God as a rebel, the same rebel that was pitched from heaven, wanting to be self-important and wanting to buck the authority that God had. And he knew that he couldn't take over God, but he could chip at what he had created, the same as he does to us. So God said, nah, you're not that powerful. And he said, well, look at Job. The only reason this guy follows you is because you give him everything. I'll bet you that if I take away some stuff, he'll fall away. God had walked with Job and knew his heart. And he said, that is not going to happen. And the devil said, well, I'll bet you I can do it. God said, fine, go for it. What Job went through was a battle of power. And he did suffer. But as you read, you find out that he also overcame it with God's help. God saved him out of this whole thing. And even though his friends, his wife, everything that was left alive turned on him, he held. And he was rewarded at the end. He didn't know that was going to happen at the time. But Job got caught in a power struggle.
But what about his relationship with God?
I don't see a problem with his relationship with God at all. In fact, when he got close to questioning God, God said, that's enough. I created the heavens and the earth. What have you created? I mean, he snuffed him right there. Job got caught. God saved him. So to say that Job's relationship with God changed, I don't see that in this at all. He questioned.
I guess my question was, did he have a relationship with God or not? I mean, that's sort of what I'm getting at.
It's says he did.
That's my whole question.
I guess I'm not getting it.
Keith, I want to just make a quick comment. You know, in the very beginning there, it talks about that you fear God. Many times in the scriptures, the words, the phrase, fear God, fear God. You know? Fear God encompasses a lot of things. If you fear God, you believe about Him, you believe about His laws, it means a lot. He had a relationship with God, and as represented by that, he fears God a lot. I don't think there's any doubt that he had a relationship with God. Right from the start, he was without sin and feared God. That kind of lays the groundwork for that relationship. And without jumping clear ahead in the scripture, we know how the book ends, but we're not there yet. We're in 4 and 5, chapter 4 and 5. So at this point, it seems like it's a given that he has that relationship.
Well, and I think it's curious that at the very beginning of the book, right, Satan's out roaming the earth, and he doesn't bring up Job. You know, God brings up Job to him. He says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" So it's not like Satan found him and said, "You know, this guy, you better leave for him, and that's why he loves you." You know, God brought him up and said, "Hey, go look at Job." So there's obviously, and he called him a servant. So just that says to me that, you know, God loved him, God had, you know, was proud of him, and that he considered him a servant. It seems like a relationship.
It's apparent from the writing that Job did well. He did good. He lived a good life. The place, and I understand what you're saying also, but when we read this, it doesn't read the same as some of the other characters in the Bible that have a relationship that's still ongoing. I'm not saying that Job never walked righteously. I can't say that because it's written in the book that he did. And it's written in the book that he was an upright man. But that doesn't mean that Job hadn't fallen away from where he was supposed to be or where he previously was. And then as we do get further into scripture, when we get further into the book, we will read that Job repented of his ways and Job went and did things that he did before the way that he was supposed to. And so I think we'll wrap up on that point for this week, and we will get back into it next week, and be blessed and good.